Dr. Jessica Stansberry. I am the director of our Center for AI Learning and Community Engaged Innovation. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us for another academic year of AI in Practice, which is our webinar speaker series. And I also want to give a special thank you to UMBC, who is a collaborator in this series, as well as Johns Hopkins University. And also want to give and the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, which is the University of Baltimore. So thank you all to our collaborators. This was a successful series last year, and we are hopeful that we will be able to provide you with continued great series. So with that, we have two speakers set up for today, and I want to thank them and introduce them. So I'm going to start with introducing Dean Merritt. Dean Merritt is a graduate of the University of Baltimore School of Law, and he is also closely affiliated with our Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. He has spent his career in legal technology and sales, and he is now the vice president of sales at MindGrub Technologies here in Baltimore, where he works with businesses building and leveraging digital solutions, including AI. Besides working with clients on building mobile apps, web apps, and websites, he helped lead MindGrub and BSO's AI in Action event, where the team created AI-generated sheet music for the BSO's musicians to play. And our second speaker today is Dr. Babola, who received her master's and PhD in electrical and computer engineering from Georgia Institute of Technology after completing her BS in computer engineering from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where she was a Meyerhoff Scholar. She is as dedicated to mentoring students and early career STEM professionals as she is passionate about developing cutting-edge technology. She remains an active UMBC and Meyerhoff alum, participating in the annual selection process of new scholars and working with scholars to transition from academic life to a STEM career. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julia.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Dean and Carolyn. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our way we wanted to launch today's webinar and the series for this school year was focusing on AI literacy and employer expectations for our new college graduates. We're hearing about lots of different advancements with artificial intelligence, and students really want to know what they need to be fully prepared for a changing workforce. So we're really excited to talk to you both about that. So to start that off, I was curious if either of you could tell us about your most impressive recent graduate hire, and if there were any specific AI skills or understandings that set them apart and made you say, wow, versus other candidates.
Sure, I can jump in if you'd like. I do have a specific hire that we just made close to 6-9 months ago now, and his experience right off the bat was based on some AI. We hired him as a business analyst, helping with our proposal team, helping analyze and do solutions for our clients. For those of you who didn't hear, we build mobile apps, websites, web apps. So we're always building custom software for other companies. And I think he had a short internship with Perplexity, one of the AI companies. So right off the bat was like impressively into AI. And he's come on board and not just utilized AI in the way that everyone would, but it's really been a drive to, I'll call it get stuff done, figure it out and get it done. And that's what AI is allowing our teams to do. We are able to build things in different ways more quickly. Even if it's just a simple website, he has gone in and created prompts. We have an entire AI labs team that he's joining as well, but he's jumped right in, figured out how to take these prompts, take it from a simple prompt into an actual website and launch it, because there's multiple steps in this process. You got to design what it's going to look like. You got to write the back end code, and then you got to launch it. Obviously, the website world has become very commoditized these days, and it's even more so now that you can create one on your own with AI. So I've just been really impressed with him and his ability to just dive in, figure it out, use AI to learn how to do something, and then using the AI to actually execute on it.
Awesome. Yeah, I've have a few new hires actually who I've found to be impressive. I work a lot with the interns that come on board, and I have a few recent graduate hires, as well as some mid-level hires. And what I find that distinguishes them from any others is their growth mindset in general. They all have different levels of skill sets. I'm an AI engineer. I hire a lot of AI engineers, but I also hire program managers, product leads, financial analysts. And what's key is that they're adaptive. They come in with a certain level of skill set, but all of them have upskilled and learned about prompt engineering. They've learned about agents and agentic AI. They've developed, in some ways, systems or programs around building more optimal tasks for our analysts and our clients. And so, if I'm to point out one person who really impresses me, is this young lady that I recruited about a year ago, and her ability to outline problems and determine what it means to solve a problem, be able to break a problem down into a certain number of key performance indicators, and demonstrate how AI is helping her with, her actually being able to perform her task more efficiently, as well as showing how the results are beneficial. Because, as we all know, AI is not perfect, and it needs to be validated and quantified. And so this person has actually been very effective at doing that. And I think that's a really key factor moving forward as we're adopting AI more and more.
That was a great way
Thank
to
you so
put it,
much.
Dr. Vadalo. Like the way breaking it down into the steps, because that's how you have to think about it with AI as well. I like that.
Thank you so much. And I believe this next question will kind of continue that sort of thread, kind of looking at the opposite end of the common misconceptions that you are seeing with your recent graduate hires as they start to use AI in the workplace. Are there instances where maybe there wasn't quite the understanding of what an AI tool was capable of doing or not doing in your work environment?
I can jump in right away because I build AI based software on a daily basis. So I have, employees who are coding AI integrated search algorithms. But I also have employees who are using AI to validate the outcomes. And I'd say one of the greatest misconceptions about AI is that it's always better to use it. AI is limited. It has cost. It's very expensive, especially globally. As the requirement, as we use more AI, the demand is actually growing, and compute is not actually competing with the amount of demand. So we're building more data centers. It has lots of even immediate sense. You're going to be paying money if you're using an actual useful AI that has, a certain level of accuracy. And it was actually initially designed for NP hard, non-deterministic problems. I come from a machine learning background. So we applied machine learning to things that were hard to write steps out in your computer programs, and if then else statements. We use AI and machine learning to solve it. So now people want to throw AI at every little thing. And being able to discern where AI is useful and where it isn't is key. And so that's actually something that many of my development teams have tackled more recently with some of our clients. They don't want to have to pay these escalating amounts of cost for using Bedrock tokens just to do context summarization. So I think that's one of the key misconceptions, and knowing how to discern where to apply certain types of AI is going to be important for some new hires.
I just wanted to jump on with a follow-up. How do you assess that discernment that you're describing, that you want them to have discernment? Like, how do you know that they have that? Like, what are the indicators you're seeing?
Yeah, so it goes back to the idea of understanding how to break down problems into the desired outcomes and being able to determine what the key performance indicators are of those outcomes and whether they're met. So, like I said, I build a lot of tools for information retrieval. I need to be able to find a needle in a haystack. I don't need to find a needle and all the hay that looks like a needle. So, if I have an AI algorithm that works just as fine on my computer, a small language model, not necessarily a big foundational model. And it's able to help me meet the level of precision that I would like, not necessarily accuracy, but precision. Then it's actually performing very well. And so, in NLP, there's some algorithms that work pretty well for search before you get into the AI space. AI can augment that, but it's something, with the latency and the cost, it's not necessarily the first solution that I always pose for a certain task. And so that's where it's going to be key, understanding the problem that you're trying to solve first, breaking it down into, what your desired outcomes are and knowing how to qualify it and quantify it.
Yeah. I like that word discernment. I think of it a little bit differently. So I run the sales team. So we are as a company AI first. So what does that mean? It means if you're on the sales team, we're using it to do research. Research is a big part of what we use it for. We're also using it afterward to build out scope of works and then it's different though with our engineering and design teams. We have both of those. So our engineers are using it to help write initial code, and then our designers are using it to do initial designs and rough wireframing and things like that normally would take a lot of time initially. And I know this is also scary to a lot of designers and artists and things like that. But if you learn how to use it right, you can use it in a way that gets you started. And I think that's the sort of misconception around AI, is that it's just going to do everything for you. And sure, maybe someday it will, and yes, can it? Like when someone comes to us with a problem, can AI do this? Sure, it can. Or can you create a software that does that? Sure, we can. If budgets are unlimited and the world is open to us, we can figure it out. But really figuring out for us, taking that AI first approach, trying it, using it, but then realizing it still requires that human intervention. It still requires that final, our QA teams are doing automated QA, but still a person is going in there and verifying. In the design world, they're creating that initial AI, but knowing that it takes more than that to refine it, to get it into the right shape and size, or build out an icon exactly the way the human wants it, creates a little bit of extra skill there. So finding that balance or discernment around how to use those different things, I think is key.
Awesome, thank you. And kind of going in that same direction, we've been talking about what are the strengths that we've seen that have wowed us. We've talked about the misconception and kind of going into that discernment. Would you say that that would be the single most important AI concept that a new hire needs to understand? Or would you say there might be something a little bit more important? Are there things that could be learned later on throughout the process, or is that something that right off the bat you got to come in with that understanding?
I think that takes time to figure that out, and it takes trial and error, and that's what learning and hopefully on your job and career is about learning how to deal with these things, and then how to discern or figure out where best to use them. So I think that's going to take years to figure out, and every year it's going to change. Every day it's changing with AI. Um, I yeah, I don't know if you agree, Doctor.
I do agree. It does take time, and I can speak from experience. Time definitely helps with understanding these problems that we're solving, and so I think being a skilled problem solver is key when it comes to AI. That's the bottom line. Understanding how to recognize problems, how to identify the source of the problems. What are some opportunity? What are options for solving the problems? That's number one to me. And then you understand the landscape of AI and how they can be applied to problems. Then you're going to become a better AI practitioner. There are lots of different large language models. There are lots of different small language models. There are lots of different AI in general. There's multimodal models. There are vision models. There are all sorts of things that you can use to solve a problem. But first thing first, understand the problem. That's number one, and understand what it means to solve the problem. So that's what I'm looking for when I'm looking for new hires.
Yeah. And you talk about other skills too. Like if you're in the engineering world, then, learn Python. That's been the one of the driving factors. But then learn all the other systems too, and learn how to work with, whether it's Microsoft's or ChatGPT, UiPath we've been seeing more of. So there's so many different technologies, and everything I just said just now is probably going to be out of date in a year. So it's going to be something different.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think prompting, understanding the concept of prompting, the different types of prompting from few shot, zero shot, chain of thought, and then how you can augment that. Like I mentioned, agentic AI is fast becoming a major component in optimizing people's workflows. And that's basically a large language model with some context and tools that is able to observe an environment and plan and perform repetitive actions over time. So you have understanding how prompting works can help with that, but also be adaptive because just as a year ago, model context protocol was not something that was a normal part of conversation. It is now. And it's adapting over time too. So I think a starting point is make sure you have a news feed that is AI seeded so that you're seeing what the latest and greatest technology is and how you can apply it to your specific domain.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up for both of you also. I'm wondering about you're talking about understanding the AI landscape. So you talked a little bit about prompting, the different types of prompting. Is there more about the AI landscape that you're expecting your new employees to know? Number one, and then number two, that what do you see people leveling up? Like, how are they leveling up? What are you expecting? Is it in-house training, or is it something they're doing on their own at this point? Again, what's the AI landscape to you, and how do people level up?
Okay, I'll start with the landscape. So again, I work in AI directly, building applications, software solutions for specific clients of various different backgrounds. And sometimes, we're working on optimizing analyst workflows, and these analysts are looking at images or they're looking at text and code. And so across the landscape, there are different types of AI that we can apply to solve these problems. There's generative AI, there's agentic AI, again, those repetitive tasks that need AI intervention to perform them. There's orchestration of agents. There's physical AI, which could augment digital twins, so a digital representation of physical assets in space or sensors. There's a lot of different types of AI, and I think again, because of the cost of AI. And because of the need to solve problems more accurately and precisely, it's important to know how to apply these models to certain use cases. And so, you don't necessarily need to apply a large language model to do object detection on a drone, and and actually have a paper that's coming out that specifies, a small swap flying UAV doesn't necessarily need to associate all of its hardware with deploying a large language model. You can actually deploy a small language model to perform the specific task you want at the edge, and maybe do some offline processing. So in the engineering space, the landscape is vast. In the daily workflow space, it's also very vast. Like I said, prompting and understanding the different types of prompting to solve your use case is going to be key. But there are also types of different machine learning that you can use to help with various different, composition, writing, etc. I actually have a specific case where I have a friend who's been writing a screenplay. And, I encouraged him to write the screenplay first and then use AI later to help him tailor it, add some embellishments, whatever. And so he did. And so he found that it was too long. And he's been using an open source AI tool called Olama that you can actually run on your computer to help him tailor it down. And he's actually been very successful at taking a 2-hour screenplay down to under 2 hours, like under 90 minutes, actually. So, you know, understanding how you can use different tools to help with different things is going to be key. And Dean, I'll hand it over to you.
No, that's great. I hear you about reinventing the wheel every time. You don't have to do that. You don't have to, you can go to AI and have it recreate code, but finding efficiencies, and doing ways of doing things isn't always going to come out of AI. AI will figure it out and give you answers and give you stuff to use, but it's not going to find all those efficiencies about where something should be done or how something should be done. Um, in fact, I love the shortening of things. I haven't tried that. One of my favorite quotes, I think it's misquoted to Mark Twain, was I'd have written a shorter letter if I had more time. And writing something shorter and more concise, I learned this in law school at University of Baltimore, was very different than writing for English class. Writing an English class paper was very different than a law school paper. You wanted to be short, concise, and to the point. And I think AI can easily go off the rails with getting lengthy and too long. Now you can use your prompts and say, please shorten this, summarize this, give me an answer in one sentence, and that helps, but it still can certainly get wordy. John, your other part of your question is about leveling up. I think, again, lifelong learning is important. So what we do at MindGrub, we've always offered assistance with education, and if you want to get a certificate or a degree or something like that, we help out. But right now, we're heavily encouraging AI ones, and I've got a few of my team doing some stuff right now, and I'm excited to for them to come back to the team, tell us about it, how it went. There's certifications with AWS. We're an AWS partner, so they have a lot of good things with that. NVIDIA has a ton of AI learning. And of course, University of Baltimore, UMBC, Johns Hopkins, others that are on this call, I know are all starting AI programs, offering classes. So I think that's really important to get that overall understanding of all things about AI, and then find certifications or other learning opportunities to really dive into the different areas.
Yeah, I agree with all of those. And as new hires at our company, they get a really nice benefit of a pretty large sum of money going to annual training.
Yep.
And my goal every year is to use as much of that as possible. And unfortunately, I haven't met that goal, but I think I will.
People are busy. It's hard.
Yes. But
Yeah.
definitely when you get hired, use that training budget as much as you can.
We have a director of AI here at MindGrub, and he's doing with our teams bi-weekly kind of Friday lunch and learns. So take that time to, internally we can learn, and then people, like I said, I'm excited to hear what people have found very valuable in this world, because there's so much out there right now in training. And I'm curious, Doctor, if you come across any that have been good or your team has used, please let me know.
Yeah, so we have a few AI tools that we've adopted because we, as a private company, we can't just use ChatGPT APIs and so forth, because that we have data. So we've partnered with certain companies, and I usually start with the quick start tutorials for the company. We've been playing with Cursor AI quite a bit. That's a code assistant tool. And I've been looking to apply it to an agentic framework. There's a Strands agent framework that's been developed, I believe, by AWS. And so a lot of us go into the grassroots. We go to GitHub and start with the README, because I'm a very hands-on learner, and pull the repositories and start learning that way. But as far as more high-level trainings are concerned, we have a partnership with Degreed, and there is an NLP course on there that's pretty comprehensive. I really like that one. There are, and it incorporates a lot of the AI and some of the history of natural language processing. But we also have, we have a partnership with AWS, and we have, we encourage AWS certifications. I actually have one that recently expired that I need to renew. So, I think those are very important as well, especially because, with AI, if you're going to work with it, in many cases, if you want it to be accurate, you're going to have to offload it to some kind of cloud processing API or something. So I would, agree with Dean with some of the trainings on AWS and NVIDIA.
Thank you so much. I do want to bring the next question to one of our co-facilitators, John Fritz. Take it away.
Thanks, Dean and Carolyn. So we've been talking a little bit about new hires, and I kind of want to go back in the process a little bit. So for recruitment and maybe interview, how could potential employees represent their AI literacy to you before they get to an interview? And at an interview, might you ask them to write a prompt?
I've not done that. But I think having a certificate, something to put on the resume that might signal some knowledge there, experience in that. Using AI to do your research on the company and initially, and you could admit in my job line of work, you could certainly admit that, and I would welcome it. That to know that they used AI to prepare for the interview, and certainly don't act like you're reading it. But that's interesting concept of write a prompt or solve a problem. We've done case interviews, so to speak, where I've had them look at a website or a piece of software and give me feedback, and then pretend to kind of put together a scope of work or help solve a problem for a mock client. Some of our more serious positions. I know some of our engineers have to write some code or share some code they've written to get the job to confirm that they can do that. But writing a prompt, that's interesting. Haven't certainly I could see us doing that.
Yeah, that is interesting. I haven't asked for prompt writing. I do coding interviews, and so I ask them to write code and also to do some system design. So we'll present a problem to them. I think one of the toughest problems was we gave them a website and asked them how they would design it. But that was specifically for an engineering position. For like a product lead, we're usually looking at how they would, again, problem solving, how they would tackle a client issue given, certain constraints. And so that's what I'm looking for. And I think what helps with resumes, and this is what I really love, I actually learned this several years ago, is to make sure you have some quantitative or qualitative, you know, uh, evaluations of your performance in your resume. So don't just tell us the tasks that you performed in your previous, internship or your program or your work, but talk about how AI, say, has optimized your performance. Maybe you've been able to write technical papers 50% faster, 100% faster because you're using this technique. Or talk about how you've been able to validate the results of AI, effectively. Again, based on the KPIs that you've outlined for the problems that you're trying to solve. So when I see those kinds of quantitative values in there, like, oh, I increased client output by, 50% over time, or we increased, user base by this much, it tends to catch my eye. So I think it's great to put those kinds of things in there.
Yeah, I always love the questions around problem solving, or how would you deal with this, or what would you do in this case? And that always sort of elicits that problem solving ability, or trying to draw that out in an interview. I don't think anybody's ever answered me, and I would start by writing a prompt and doing this, or maybe they're quickly doing that on the side. I haven't noticed that, but certainly that'd be fine with me if that's how they approached it initially.
Thanks so much. I'm going to bounce it over to Henry.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. Thanks, Carolyn and Dean. I'm going to circle back to the global topic we're talking about, and more or less in terms of how higher education can help make an impact in the workforce. We talked a little bit about the technical skills that are important for utilizing AI, as well as some of the soft skills like problem solving, something that's somewhat innate, that's hard to teach. And the idea that as we move forward, AI is becoming more of a universal skill for all employees. But I'm curious to hear from what you've seen. Where's the biggest gap between what universities teach about AI and what employers actually need? How might higher education better prepare our students for AI integrated roles at your firms?
I'll
Well,
start off with one thing, not really answering your question, but around skills is I run a sales team, and very few universities have a class on sales. And you can certainly, and I think AI could be incorporated into every single class that's taught. And I'm sure you're probably being forced to incorporate it to decide what is allowed and what is not. We can't have it writing the whole term paper, but how can you use it appropriately? So I love the practical application. That's actually something I very much liked about my education at University of Baltimore, as the law school really focused on the practical application of the law, not just sit there and think about how this might work, or discuss the Constitution. Of course, we had constitutional law, but really that practical application. And I think that then gets to the answer to your question of, how can you practically, what are the use cases? I've done a few of these AI talks. I've done it with my CEO. And what everybody really wants to get down to when we're speaking to businesses about this is, okay, but what really can we do? What is possible? How does this AI thing gonna help me? And you have to get into the specific use cases and maybe that's a way to do that in the university world. Give them a bunch of data, because data is one place that AI can digest and visualize and help you, and create use cases for students to take data, solve a problem, and then present that problem. So maybe that's some of the ways they could do that.
Yeah, I agree with Dean. And I'll go into another topic, which is I think there should be a comprehensive education about AI ethics. And this all goes hand in hand with understanding the AI landscape and how you apply it to certain problems. But understanding whether you should apply it is also important. Like I said, there's still a cost associated with it, and so understanding, like, you want to solve problems, you want to lower the cost of performing certain tasks, you want to be able to increase the customer satisfaction overall. But is it worth, $1 billion? In most cases, no. And so, I think students should have, a full grasp of, what the cost benefits are to using AI, and what are the trade-offs. I think AI is amazing, and it has a way, it has a possibility to change lots of things and for the better. But I also think that there might be a shift in, a little less AI first and, more AI optimization. And so again, where I can write regular business logic, if then else statements, I'm going to continue writing if then else statements because they're cheaper, faster, and more efficient. But I'm going to apply the AI where it needs to be applied. And so, being able to understand those trade-offs, and then also understand, the, micro scale and macro scale cost of AI, I think is important, part of education as well.
Thanks so much. I wanted to just really quickly acknowledge all the folks who have started to put questions in the Q&A. We'll get to attendee questions a little bit later in our session. And Carolyn, I just wanted to thank you for the nice segue into our question related to ethics. So I know from the University of Baltimore standpoint, that is one of the biggest questions that keeps coming up with our students from a wide variety of angles, just talking about responsibility, ethics, sustainability, things of that sort. Can you, either of you, share a recent situation where that AI ethics understanding directly impacted your team's decision making? And I'd like to know, how you might evaluate an employee or a candidate's ability to navigate some of those challenging decisions.
Yeah, it's certainly difficult, and has many applications in AI, from hiring to how we look at things to biases all built in there. More recently, we've just been dealing with private data and how best to still use AI, but not expose, company secrets, or other companies that we work with expose any of their data that's private. That's outside of just when we work with healthcare and you're dealing with HIPAA and those things, but every little thing, like just taking our different scope of works and case studies and all these things we've assembled and putting them into an AI so that we can get more information out of it. We've got to do that in a way that in a RAG or in some closed loop area, which does require paying more for these AI systems to have ones that are closed loop and aren't going to be shared. And there's also some trust issues going on out there of, okay, they say they're not sharing this, but are they? Or they say they're sharing it anonymously, but if it's real data, then it's not anonymous. So there's a lot of, I think, trust issues going on around there. And I think we're going to see some litigation around this. You've already seen a little bit around taking copyrighted works and utilizing them in AI. So there's so many. We could go many different directions with discussing the ethics and legalities of what's going on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Data privacy is very important. I mentioned my friend's use case who was writing a screenplay. His big thing is he wanted to make sure his data remained private, and so that's why I recommended that he use the Olama capability. Not quite as accurate as the foundational large models, but it's something you can run completely contained on your machine. So yeah, data privacy is important. AI models have bias, and there's several different factors that contribute to that. Again, you have control over the prompting and the prompting strategy. And so being able to tweak your prompts to reduce bias, that's actually a thing. And you can actually add context to your AI models as well so that it can reduce bias, in the form, Dean mentioned RAG. That's one approach. You can, if you're using like few shot or chain of thought prompting, you can add context to that so that it's redirected and not giving you output that's completely off base. And so that's it's something that we're considering. I actually run a team, and we're working on an internal white paper where we have a bias detecting framework for civil intelligence. And we're essentially tweaking different prompts in different AI models and measuring its bias over time and comparing them across the board. So that's important. And I think, we actually have a whole sector in our company, a whole section within my sector. I'm in the Chief Technology Office that's dedicated to responsible AI. And so we evaluate AI projects before they even start. And it's a very long evaluation format that deals with the need for privacy of the client data, the classification level, whether it's public health information or private health information or personal identifiable information, et cetera. And we have to be able to make sure we're handling it in as careful a manner as possible. So we've dedicated a whole area to make sure that we're continually monitoring our use of AI and making sure it remains in ethical, we're working on an ethical fashion. And this is an evolving space. So that evaluation is always growing. We're always optimizing it. But it is something I think that people should be aware of and make sure they're considering it before they apply AI, especially to a use case that you're working for a client.
Thank you so much. Just being mindful of time, I'm going to take a look at the Q&A, and I did see that Dean would like to answer a question. I didn't realize you could see it and you could pick that. So
Yeah.
with this question, and there were a couple on agentic AI, but are we still going to be hiring humans when agentic AI is big and with OpenAI launching Agent Kit this week?
Yeah. Yeah. So the answer to that question, I say yes, absolutely. But we're going to hire humans that know how to use AI and know how to leverage it and know how to problem solve and discern and all the things we've been talking about so far. So yes, absolutely. Now, are there industries that are going to be, or certain job duties that are going to go away a little bit? I think we've already seen customer support. We outsourced as a country, we outsourced it for a while. Now you're getting better and better AIs. It's not so bad calling and talking to your bank and yelling at a machine. You're actually getting some talking back and forth. I actually booked a car appointment for myself the other day, completely dealing with AI. And it wasn't too bad. It was not hard. It was not, it didn't leave me like so frustrated that I didn't want to do it. So yes, there are those industries those jobs are going to be less. I think there might have been a question even further down too of taking that, managing agentic AI. So yes, you're going to have to, the people, there's going to be more management involved. The workforce has shifted from all of time from into manufacturing, where you got to manage and know how to build and fix these machines that manufacture. Now then you had computers, and now you've got computers that are doing your work for you, and you got to find ways to manage it, make it better, make it more efficient, make modifications. So all that's still going to have to happen, and you're going to need those people. And when all else fails, we're still going to need plumbers and electricians, but which are good jobs.
Yeah, we definitely need plumbers and electricians. I can attest to that personally. But one thing that we also should consider is that AI, again, we have large language models. They were built a certain way to optimize, to basically accelerate the growth of these transformer, based components of software that was used for natural language processing. And they're actually pretty specific. Like the foundational models, they look like they can do anything, but they're not all actually that good at everything. And on top of that, we're running out of good, clean, high-level data. So we still need people to produce and generate data. We still need people to write books. It's actually very biased toward certain languages too. We need people to write books in different languages across the world and and share them with AI. So we still need creatives to generate content in general. And I know, I'm all about this growth mindset. We have to think adaptively. We've done this since the beginning of time. Since the creation of the steam engine. Since the invention of the wheel. There are various different ways we can go with AI, and I think we haven't even begun to see how humans will optimize their ability to leverage AI and still create value for their society. So I think we'll definitely continue hiring people for sure.
Yeah, I think we're still a long way away from somebody had said, the next billion-dollar company is going to be, run by one or two people. I think we're a pretty long way away from that, but could happen.
So I did want to jump in here because I heard this theme of the ethics and responsible use. So that seems to be a skill that new college grads should be focusing on, this kind of understanding. And then following up with the kind of new employees, do you think having the students, the graduates, building a AI use case portfolio of saying like, hey, here's a couple examples of how I used AI during my college career or in my internship. Is that going to be something that students or new grads should be thinking about, kind of an AI portfolio to demonstrate some of their competency in that area?
I like that idea. I definitely would give a resume a second look if they have that in there. But again, I'm looking for how it improves their performance overall.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And we did a sprint internship, which is like a mini internship with some students last winter, and that's exactly what they did. They spent time creating different use cases that would solve problems here or for or proposed problems for our clients. Worked out how that would look and what systems they would use and how they would create it, and then presented that back. And we did another similar with high school students in the area who came in, part of the Building Steps program here in Baltimore, of having students come in and they learned a little bit about what we did, and then did a little workshop together to figure out solutions to problems and how AI and different technologies could solve those.
Dean, following off of that, I wanted to point out another question that came from the Q&A, and it's something that I've been running into recently working with the high school students that are on our campus right now as their building is under construction. And the concern about the impact generative AI can have on their critical thinking skills. There's more and more studies coming out indicating that it is diminishing their critical thinking abilities. If they are relying more heavily on AI, I would love to know, Dean and Carolyn, your thoughts on that research and how you might respond to those concerns.
Yes, I saw a funny video the other day of like two people completely incapable of interacting with each other because they had to type every response into their phone and then see what AI told them, and then they would say that, and then their person would say that back, and it was a funny take on all of that. But that's why it comes down, and that was the very first thing I think we said on this call was about problem solving. You got to have the problem solving skills and work on those and get better at those and learn where to use it and where not to. Because otherwise, yes, you'll get bogged down with that. But again, I think, like I said, workforce changes over time. Every generation is accused of something that they can't do that the other one did better because they had this technology or didn't have this technology. So yeah, I think it's all about the problem solving and understanding where and how to use it, and not relying on it for 100% of everything you do.
Yeah, I think a lot of the I've read some summaries of that paper. I haven't delved into it yet, but I think a lot of the diminishing cognitive load is because you're basically distributing your attention all over the place. And AI should be able to help with that. I mean, agents, they kind of offload your attention. You write the agents and it does some workflow for you in the back end, and you can focus on tasks. And so it's important for people really to just kind of be able to focus on individual tasks for a certain amount of time, to reduce some of that loss of cognitive function. So yeah, I don't know if it's entirely the fault of incorporating AI into their work stream. It's just not incorporating AI effectively and efficiently, because you're still multitasking, so, use AI to help with that, not to contribute.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that. I did want to turn more to the technical side of things. There was a question that I know I hear, and I would love, hearing your thoughts on it about the micro costs of AI. I was just asked this today by a high school teacher wanting to know even the micro costs or even what is considered a hidden cost. This attendee said that something was mentioned about tokens and wanting to understand and have clarity on what that looks like, what that means.
Sure. I mentioned using AWS Bedrock and other APIs. They typically have a paid subscription cost, and so I have my own VPC that I work with, so that's what I'm more familiar with. Basically, every query and every result that comes out of a large language model is priced as a token. And so, there's a cost for a certain number of tokens that you use over time with AI. So in the short term, that costs a lot of money. There's also some additional backing costs. If you're using a platform like AWS, you're going to be using servers, you're going to be using, some of the network capabilities. So all of that is going to be associated with the cost of using AI. If it's just minute tasks, it might be negligible. It could be, less than $20 a day. Well, no, it probably won't be that little, but it could be pretty low. But that's the micro cost of using AI if you want to use something that's like, relatively well trained and foundational. But you can also reduce that cost, right? Like I said, there are open source on computer capabilities. Olama is what I use just to mess around. I'm sure there are others. And that uses quantized versions of some of the models so that they're small enough to run on your machine, and you can do like prompting, et cetera, and get some output from there, or try muck around with AI and test, how you can do those kinds of promptings that I mentioned.
Yeah.
Those are the micro expenses.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah, there's a lot of different expenses you got to manage. Thankfully, there's so much free out there for everyone on the call here that we can try and use and test. But when putting it into business applications, you've got to look at those costs. We had to look at what does it take to get everyone in our company, a higher level large language model they can use, and that'll add up. The next we worked with Coppin State University to build an AI chatbot, and there are off-the-shelf agents that were others created that they could buy or subscribe to or pay per use. Those costs are very high because somebody has already created something. What we ended up working with them was, because they also wanted it to be more custom, we created a custom one. Then the cost of that is every time someone runs a search, there is the token, the micro cost of every time it runs through that has to be paid for. So you got to balance and figure out what is the best ROI on these things, and every business is going to be looking at that to determine if it's worth it, if it's cost effective, and balancing all those costs. So yeah, that's the micro costs. I guess I don't know if you call them the macro costs, but then you've got what the world's looking at around power generation and data centers and how much power they need, which is the next thing that is going to have to be tackled by our country as a whole.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just taking a peek to what we're seeing here. So I'm noticing a couple of questions that are about, where to focus our energy. So for AI use, does it make more sense as a back-end process for improving, for example, manufacturing accuracy and then consumer applications? Is that something that would have more value, or can it have more of a productive place throughout a company, throughout an industry?
You're asking, go ahead if you understand the question, Doctor.
It's an interesting question.
So, okay, when you say, is it better for like back end processes? So I think of back end as in like, like there's some data processing, heavy load data processing that needs to occur, to feed or to serve to a customer on the front end, right? And so, they're separate and they're asynchronous and, offline. And yes, AI can be useful for that. However, when I'm thinking about back-end processing, like say for software, I need to make sure that that software, the data is processed accurately and cleanly and succinctly. And oftentimes I don't have a human interface at that layer to be able to confirm that. So I don't necessarily think AI is great there. I definitely use it there because, there's a lot of heavy load data processing that needs to occur. And there are some tasks that AI does pretty well and accurately that I can use it for, but I don't necessarily think it's the only place to put it. We work with federal clients and a lot of them love human in a loop type applications. So we do like some data processing and then we give the analyst a prompt and say, does this look good? Something like that. Those kinds of systems work fairly well. So that's somewhat hybrid. So, hopefully I'm answering your question, but when you say back end, this is how I see it. It's like there are trade-offs for both. Large language models are actually pretty good at building front end like tooling. Like it's actually they're not bad at that. Now the back end systems, not so much. I think you need to know what you're building in the back end. Like if you're doing data pipelining, to extract context for a search application, you need to make sure the context is accurate, or you're going to be answering queries incorrectly because you don't have the right information associated with the corpus that you're searching. So again, it's a trade-off. If you want to clarify your question, please do, but hopefully that was a good enough answer for you.
No, I think that was well done. I was reading it from our Q&A, and I think just kind of as I said, there are people trying to figure out where do we start, where do we focus our priorities, and kind of recognizing that it's a case by case, industry by industry, and kind of depending on what you have access to. So I think that was a great answer. I want to be mindful of time, and I see a couple of different questions. But I also see, oh my gosh, there's a very sweet, how did Dean Merritt and Carolyn Babalola become so awesome, wise, and insightful? How did you do that? But to wrap things up, I will make it kind of threefold. So where do you think universities need to prioritize their energy to help prepare our students? Where do you think students need to set their priorities for building these skills? And what are some resources that you both recommend to help kind of, you were mentioning, staying up to date on certain news articles, or maybe you curate your social media feed for certain information. So what should universities do? What should students do? And what helps you stay up to date?
Okay. Well, universities should partner with people like me and Dean. You know, if you need someone on your board, let me know. But no, I have a team. We ran a capstone project with some local universities, and we were talking to UMBC recently. It's currently on hold. We you know, funding, you know, changes, et cetera. But that's a great way to get the students involved in more hands-on type work, like from the industry perspective. And of course, make sure you have strong internship programs for students, so they're getting, you know, real life experience before they're graduating. That's key. But you know, like I mentioned, AI ethics, you know, let's look into, you know, building coursework around that. And for the students, you know, just lean in. You know, think about what excites you about, you know, going out into the world and offering your field of expertise, and see how AI can help that. You know, I became an engineer because I have interest in lots of things, and I've always wanted to solve it in a technical way. But if you meet me, I've done everything from, you know, my dissertation was in brain computer interface, to, you know, working on telecom signals detection, to you know, working with you know, natural language processing and search algorithms. Now I've done lots of stuff because I love solving problems for people. And, you know, there are certain problems that are more interesting to me. So think about what your contribution is going to be, and AI is going to be the tool that's going to help you, but it is not necessarily the problem that you're solving. It is a tool for you.
Yeah. Yeah, you really nailed that, I think, with the universities and the business and the university business partnership that is always taking place. And I know all the universities are putting a lot of stock into that, but getting real world experience, bringing in people from the business world to talk like this and the classes. And I think that experience and that learning is the best way to go about it. The other thing, if this is sort of closing thoughts and to answer the second part of your question, is I think AI right now is a great assistant. You still have to have the foundational knowledge and understanding of, if you're doing coding with AI, then you better have some understanding of coding to be able to get the most out of it, or understanding a design to get the most out of the design and aesthetics and have that basic knowledge. It's a great assistant to help you get started, to help you tweak, or to help you think about things that maybe you're not thinking about. That's a great prompt right there, is to ask what, you know, what else should I be looking at or thinking about. I have seen AI getting better and better of, like I said, it's going to change every week, but starting to ask, would you like me to do this? Or would you like to consider this? It's going to be scary when AI is telling us what to do. But right now we're telling it what to do. It's a great assistant, and utilize it for all of those things. But don't forget to use your own brain as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, both of you, Dean and Carolyn, for your time. This has been really insightful. I know there were a lot of other questions in the Q&A, and unfortunately, we're getting close to the end of time. But I will be sending a follow-up email tomorrow with our session recording, as well as where you can find Dean and Carolyn, and if there's any other recommendations they may have for next steps. I'm going to quickly share our exit survey. We are always wanting to make sure that this series meets the needs of our viewers. So take a moment, you could do the link bit.ly/AIP-survey. And you are welcome to give us your thoughts. And we will also send this out via email. Dean, Carolyn, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you spending this afternoon with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.